to today's edition of Politics 101. It's Tuesday evening, wherever you are, whether you are in Guyana, where there is still lots of rain, or you are in the Eastern Caribbean, in the Caribbean in general, you're in North America, Europe, wherever you are, welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. My guest tonight, our General Secretary of the Trade Union Congress, Mr. Lincoln Lewis, who will not be speaking in that capacity. He will be appearing tonight in his personal capacity as a political activist and political analyst. My other guest is Mr. Leno Craig, a former executive member of the Alliance for Change, and has been a politician. General topic tonight is what to do about the galloping dictatorship. Of course, that topic makes the assumption that we are in the presence of a galloping dictatorship. Some would argue that we are already in the presence of a dictatorship. The term dictatorship has always been controversial. Different people have had different definitions for a dictatorship. We've known about one-party dictatorships. We have known about one-person dictatorships. But here in Guyana, we have always talked about dictatorships in a very loose way. When the PNC was in office from 1964 to 1992, many of us described it as an authoritarian regime that governed within the context of a multi-party democracy. What that meant is that although the party was not a single party, there were other parties operating, nevertheless, that party dominated the political environment, and other parties were locked out of the decision-making process. We had a situation where other elements of democracy, such as free speech, the right to assemble, the right of association, all of those rights were systematically trampled on. Once the PNC regime was voted out of office in 1992, the PPP took office. The assumption, therefore, was that we were moving from a dictatorship to democracy. And so what we saw was the PPP continuing in the same vein as the government before, but doing so under the cover of democracy. Nothing changed. It was the same constitution. It was the same single party dominance. It was the same systemic violation of norms and rights and liberties, such as the right to free speech, the right to association. We still had political assassinations, etc. So here is the thing. The literature on post-dictatorship or post-authoritarian regime says that you can have two outcomes. You can have a transition to democracy. You can have a continuation or a further advance on the democratic regime, on the dictatorial regime. So the end of a dictatorship, so to speak, does not necessarily mean democracy. The end of a dictatorship could mean a continuing of that dictatorship to another level. In the case of the PPP from 1992 to 2015, was that it operated as a democracy while maintaining all the tenets of a dictatorship. Problematic because the same kind of protest as when a government is openly dictatorial. And so For a long time, the PPP was able to operate as though it were a democracy until much later on, when it was accepted that we had gone to a dangerous level of dictatorship. Dangerous because the dictatorship was operating under the cover of democracy. We had a break between 2015 and 2020. And I say break because, in my estimation, it was the only government in our post-colonial era that one could not, in a classical way, describe as a dictatorship. There were no systemic violations of human rights. The right to free speech, for the most part, was respected, notwithstanding the fact that two people on this panel tonight were denied the right of free speech in the state newspaper. Well, I think that was perhaps the only blemish. But generally, the right to free speech was maintained. The right to association was maintained. There weren't any systematic harassment and jailing of opposition members, etc. And so, therefore, I would describe that government, 2015 to 2020, as the most democratic or the least dictatorial in Guyana's post-colonial political history. We've seen since the return of the PPP in August of 2020, a mere resumption of where it left off in 2015. That is understandable because the PPP is not at the time to reflect on its own tenure from 1992 to 2015. But critically, 5 years was not enough for the coalition government to dismantle the dictatorial structures in the political system, and that was key. While the coalition itself did not violate human rights and did not become a dictatorship, it was not able to dismantle the dictatorial architecture that was left there when the PPP took over. The PPP took over from the PNC in 1992, and itself, it did not dismantle those structures, although it had 23 years to do it, but it chose not to do it. It chose to use those structures and to enhance them in order to govern in a dictatorial way. To its credit, like I said, the coalition government did not go the dictatorial way, but it did not make any systematic moves to derail the dictatorial aspect. Perhaps 5 years was too short. One could argue. One could argue that they intended to do so. My own view is that there was no systematic intent on the part of the coalition government to structurally deal with the question of the state, the dictatorial state. Let's go back to when we became independent. When we became independent, we inherited a colonial state. And the colonial state had all the trappings of authoritarianism, of dictatorship, because that was what colonialism was about. And so, therefore, the conversation, we are on the anniversary of Walter Rodney's assassination, the conversation between the Walter Rodney generation and the Burnham generation is whether you dismantle that colonial state or you keep it. And the Burnham generation, when it was Burnham, Eric Williams, Bear Bird, Eric Gary, they all kept that colonial state. Now, this is not to say that they did not introduce progressive policies. They did. I mean, I spent the weekend talking about the progressive policies in Guyana and in Jamaica under Michael Manley. Those policies were among the most progressive in the post-colonial world. Yet, they all, whether it was Nkrumah in Ghana, or any of the post-colonial African states, they all maintained the colonial authoritarian state. That was the quarrel between the fathers and mothers and their sons and daughters. What to do about that state? And I'm arguing that in the Caribbean, our Caribbean, meaning the old West Indies, our English-speaking Caribbean, we did not dismantle the colonial state. Even as we tried to dismantle the social relations that were left by colonialism, even as we tried to dismantle the economic superstructures that were left by colonialism, our failure at independence was our inability to dismantle the post-colonial state, the colonial state, sorry. Even in a place like Tanzania with Julius Nyerere, who had very progressive policies, very, very progressive. The Ujamaa policy was very progressive. From Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya, Kwame Nkrumah, all that progressive social policies and so forth, economic policies, Justice Burnham and Manley and Barrow and Williams and so on. But none of them dismantled the authoritarian state. I give that overview to make the argument that the dictatorship that we're seeing in 2021 cannot be seen or should not be seen as the PPP deciding, hey, we want to be dictators. But that we have never done anything to the state structures, hence it makes it easier for the PPP's dictatorial instinct to be where it is today. I want this politics 101. So I want our audience to understand how this thing works. The PPP has a policy, it has an ideology of domination. That's part of the PPP's ideology, ethnic domination. It has now added a new aspect to its ideology, and that is the supremacy of capital over labor. The supremacy of capital over labor, right? And I'm not talking here just about simple capitalism, right? Although it is capitalism, but it's a particular brand of capitalism that is not the same as the American brand of capitalism. Hence, I refer to the PPP's ideology as ethnic capitalism. That is a capitalism that is grounded in ethnic dominance and ethnic marginalization of the other. So therefore, here is this state that we got from colonialism that we didn't do much with. All right? Clive Thomas has a book that was published in 1984 called The Rise of the Authoritarian State in the Periphery. He was bringing the periphery, meaning countries like Guyana and the Caribbean and Africa and so on, who are on the periphery of the world system. And so he was talking about the authoritarianism in this country being somewhat different from the authoritarianism in Europe and USA and so on. All right? And it is this state that was left by colonialism that is still here 60 years later, that makes it so easy for a PPP to engage in the kind of dictatorial policies they engage in. Right? Now, what the PPP skillfully does is that it confines democracy to free and fair election. This thing, free and fair election. Because all it has to do is to call an election free and fair, and that is democracy. And then they get into power, and then they unleash these policies which are buttressed by this authoritarian state, this dictatorial state that were left there from colonialism. So let me before I bring in my guest, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. In 1983, we were having a march against hunger. It was the time of the banning of food items and so on. and things were getting bad. And the WPA held a march. We called it what you call a day of rest. Lincoln Lewis will remember that. And then we call a second one. It was in 1983. The whole thing was triggered by a worker named Mr. Leach, who catch bad feelings, as we say, on the job, and he dropped down. And the bauxite workers called a strike without it being sanctioned by the union. And then it became a general strike, and the whole country was caught up. And we called the day of rest, the WPA. And we asked people to stay home, don't go to work, don't drive your taxi, don't drive your minibus. And people responded in a way that we ourselves were surprised. Well, the advice was that we shouldn't march, we should stay home. But the Buxtonians came knocking at me and my brother's door and saying they want to march. And so we decided to march around the village. And they marched into the school, one of the schools, to bring out the students. They had locked the school gate. And the marchers opened the gate and they went into the school and tried to get the children to come out and march. They still had school gardens in those days, so they just reaped tomatoes or tomato that morning. And some of the marchers trampled up on the tomato that the people had picked. And about 2 weeks after the march, the police came to me and said, I am summoned because I am charged with destroying a tomato. Well, of course, I had nothing to do with it, but I was leading the march. So they charged me with destroying a tomato. And I was dragged before the court. It was an Indian woman who was the magistrate at that time. Her name was Chinta. She was livid. She screamed at the police, "This is a colonial law," she said. "This is a law when the slaves could not, the slaves were being punished if they destroyed a crop on the plant, something on the plantation, but it was left on our books, probably still there." So in 1983, I was charged with destroying a tomato, a slave law that's still in our books. The magistrate threw the case up because he felt that it was a disgrace in 1983 to serve, to charge a young black man with a slave law. I made that point to say that we did not break down the colonial architecture. So a lot of those slave laws are still on our books. And so what we depended on was the goodwill of the governors, that they would not exploit the authoritarian state that was left there from colonialism. And we're in the presence, I think, of people who have no goodwill, and so therefore would exploit. I asked Nigel Hughes the other night, under what statute the people at GCOM are being charged? And is that, you know, there are broad laws on that thing, like obstructing justice, or broad laws like defrauding the state. Those laws are broad laws that are there, and when you have nothing to charge people on, you charge them under those laws, right? They're called what are called elastic laws. You can put anything under them. And so it's the nature of the state that I think we have to dismantle, but that's just my thing. My guests will argue tonight what to do. What to do about that authoritarian state. Welcome. I guess everybody's settled down. You've shared the link, and here we are on Politics 101. Gentlemen, Leno, Craig, Lincoln Lewis, welcome to Politics 101.
Well, thank you, my brother.
Is
Thanks for
Leno
inviting
there?
me.
Yes, I'm here.
All right, Leno, let me start with you since you're a newcomer. You've heard my long introduction. Is there anything there that you disagree with?
Well, it's not a question whether I disagree. It's how I can help you to shape it, to refine it.
All right, go right ahead.
Let me say to you, David, listeners, let me make the point from the outset that what you're seeing is just what I expected. Before the last election, there were people who I know who will say to me that the PPP will change. And I said to them, they will not, because I read them just the same as playing cricket with a football, the ball big in front of us. These guys will never, when they speak about democracy, they believe that it's a process where they will determine what you get, when you get it, and where you get it from. That is how they see democracy. They don't see anything different. We are not in a. Don't think about democracy when you're talking to the PPP. Don't think about it at all. They believe they can. This is a party or a group of people who believe that they and the courts must acquire all the wealth in this country and share it among themselves. And the masses must grovel at the table. What these guys have done is to just set the reset button. The same things they're doing now, they did in 1992. If you remember in 1992, Clement Roy, who was Minister of Foreign Affairs, traveled around the world and at all the missions and decided who will remain and who will go. At home, they decide who head of company or corporation that will remain. And even what they did to customs, I believe one time it was about 13 men they get rid of at customs. I am not surprised at them. I expect them to behave the way they're behaving. And they are only getting through because, as you said, the systems that are in place help them to do that, facilitate the process. And the second thing, which you didn't say, that the people who are supposed to hold are the testicular fortitude to do that. So they are getting through. What we need to do is much more than we are doing.
Lincoln, before we get to what we need to do, we just wanted to establish the issue that we're dealing with, and you have done that. You've made reference to the PPP's own ideological outlook and how that is linked to the system. But you have added the third factor, that those who are there to oversee the system are not doing so, and so therefore it makes it easier for one to exploit the system. Let's bring in Leno here. Leno, you heard my introduction. You've heard your elder Lincoln. Anything that you want to add to our introduction? Leno Craig? Is Leno with us? It seems as though Leno is not with us.
I am here.
Hello?
Yes. Hello.
Mr. Moderator, please communicate with us so we know.
Hello. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Leno Craig.
Good. In presenting my point, I want to stay away from specific naming dictators as you did. All right? I would.
No, I didn't name dictators. I didn't name dictators.
No.
I named parties.
Organizations and parties, right?
Yes, I named parties.
For me, I think that the root of any form of dictatorship that we have experienced at any time in Guyana is our constitution and our law. Now, our constitution, by the very nature of it, to use your term, create a dictatorial state. And it creates what some people in academia and otherwise call an elected dictatorship. And our constitution does that for us. It gives our leaders and our ruling parties almost godlike powers. And when you have those kinds of provisions in your constitution, any person merely being elected to office um, assumes the seat of a dictator. I remember one interview with Moses Nagamutu many years ago, and he was extolling the virtues of Dr. Teddy Jagan. And he said when they were elected in 1992, he went to Dr. Jagan and he said, Doc, aren't we going to do something to change the constitution? It does create dictators. And Dr. Jagan turned to him and said, Man, Mose, do I look like a dictator? Am I a dictator? And he said that was the end. That was the end of the discussion because he did not see Dr. Jagan as a dictator. That is not how he revered or regarded him. And so we as citizens, we are left to the good conscience of the leader. So the constitution creates a dictator, but the leader can take it to whatever extent he or she chooses. And so we have to go back to the root and we have to have the constitution overall. I know there are some changes in the constitution, and the same PPP government um, that you made mention of today earlier in your presentation of using this constitution and some of the laws to its fullest extent. Um, in their term of office, they changed a couple of things. For example, the term limits on presidents and opposition leader, for example, having say in appointing the Chief Justice and the Chancellor and things like that. And those were some improvements. But overall, the Constitution of itself empowers a person so much that sometimes you go and you assume that seat. And like Dr. Jagan, you say, look, I am not a dictator. I ain't gonna use the full extent of the elected dictatorship that is handed to me by the Constitution. And so there's no need to tinker with it. I gonna be a good person.
Yeah,
And then when
yeah.
you feel the power that the Constitution delivers to you, it is human nature to want to use it. It is human nature. And I think that is what is facing Guyana, that human nature, right? It's as we say in other words, it's a dog eat dog world out there. And it's open hunting season for a politician.
All right. I'm coming to you. I'm Lincoln. I know you will come in. I know you will come in, Lincoln. So you have said that the Constitution is the problem. I chose to put emphasis on the state that arises from the Constitution. But I know that Lincoln has historically had some problems with that formulation. Lincoln has argued that our constitutions do have some good parts of it, but it's that though it is the people, the rulers and others who do not uphold the rule of law, and that is the problem. All right, Lincoln, come in. Don't let me speak for you.
let me say from the outset thing that I disagree with that argument, that simplistic argument by many persons that the Constitution is the problem. Britain don't have one. United States have one with just a few. And tell me how people are able to hold these governments accountable. We have one with how many hundred paragraphs. It is not the Constitution. It's the question here that we have not put the concomitant laws in place to hold our elected officials accountable. We cannot argue or be arguing that is the Constitution. The Constitution, as I've always said, is dead at its heart unless it is activated by people. This thing is about people. The question is that you elect people, they are in public office, and what we do when they do something, we sit idly by and say, this is what they do, rather than do something about it. You got dictatorship where there are guns and cannons and people challenging them. You know, I remember an issue. I remember when they passed the, what you call it, the anti-terrorist law or something like that some years ago. I was in Peru. I remember well. And I heard the opposition saying, you can't march any longer. You can't picket. I came into Barbados and I called back Ben Scott, Norris Witter, Freddie Kisuna, said, let's go there. I'm coming to Guyana, we're going to challenge it. And we start to protest in front of the office of the president. And people start get the confidence and start to protest again. I am telling you, it is, let me tell you, it is a middle upper class mentality to really telling people, we can't do nothing. We only got to change the Constitution. We have to do things to change the behavior. The same question, the same point, the same Constitution was in place in 1980. And in 1983, we had one of the biggest, we had protests across the country that you spoke about, David, against the question of shortage of food. Right? In 1989, we had big strikes in this country. We protest. It is thing about people and people fighting. And the question here is that people telling you that protest is not good any longer. We should not protest. There's the same people who demonize protest telling us about constitutional change. We can't wait for that. What in the Constitution, it must be respected now. Like Article 27, which speaks about free education. What are we going to do? We're going to wait till the Constitution change and demand that we have it? That's our constitutional right. What will we do about it? That's the type of things that we have to start doing. And the people who are elected and sit in the opposition bench got to get up and start to do this thing. Start to speak on our behalf. That's what I want to see right now.
Craig, come right in. I'm not going to get in between this.
Mr. Lewis, you're limiting activism to street protests. I have not mentioned anything against street protests or anything of the sort. I am merely theorizing.
Typically, you're talking about. Don't tell me the Constitution. Show me what you're talking about.
Enables. And if you ask me, I will say since 1980 to now, the Constitution created elected dictatorship. And all serving government since 1980 to this day could be defined as an elected. Look, the Constitution literally creates a one-party government. You either
show me in the Constitution what let me tell you, Leno Craig. Let me tell you this. Let me tell you this. Change it next week and put something else. Unless we prepare to hold people accountable, nothing will happen. The question here is not the Constitution, it's our inactivity, in our activeness. We do not want to fight for anything.
Lincoln, let me ask. Hold on, Leno. Lincoln, let me ask you this. Is protest the only way to ensure the rule of law?
I want to tell you something. You can go to court, but when you're going to court, you must have people outside. Let me tell you, David, to win a war or to start defeating people from taking up one battle at a time, one after the other, it has to be a multifaceted approach to it. It's not only sitting down and say we go to parliament. Let us examine what we do after today.
Let us come back in.
Yesterday, I've been saying
Okay.
it all the time that the PPP is going to do one thing to the opposition. They will lose their simple majority to get what they want to get. And when when it requires a two-third majority, they will do everything to agree for something with the opposition. And when the opposition support that, the next sitting, they go back to the same behavior, right? I've always argued that the opposition approach to this politics has to change. The question, don't give them no legitimacy in parliament. Don't go in there and sit down, because you know what they will do. They will debate the motion. They will debate anything that you put there. They will stonewall a question that you put. And at the end of it, they vote, and you know what they will say? They will say the democratic process. This is democracy. That is not democracy. Democracy is not using your privileged position to disenfranchise people of what is justly theirs.
Lincoln, let us come right in.
Yeah, Lincoln, you are saying, and you're contradicting some of what you're saying. Any government that is in office is able to do that because the national architecture sets it up that way. Now, too often, we talk about going in the streets and we talk about protesting. And then when we go in the streets and we protest, too often we have nothing behind it. So we haven't given a thought to what we want our new democracy to look like. It is not
You tell me what you want it to look like. You tell me, but don't talk around it. Tell me what you want. Tell me what you want.
No.
Tell me what you're going to do.
You are talking about muscle in the street.
I am saying to you, I said to you, Leno Cred, I said to you earlier, I said to you guys earlier, what we have to do, you have to have a multifaceted approach. That's the point I'm making. Right. I'm saying a multifaceted approach. You can't go in the National Assembly and just be talking and talking and talking, and you get nothing. You know what you're doing? You're demoralizing your support base, and they will walk away from you.
All right. Let me come in here. I wanted to establish at the beginning of the show that a dictatorship is a combination of the intent of a political party when it holds office, but that intent has to be facilitated, and the laws that govern the country. They're enshrined in the Constitution, they're enshrined in the state. My own view, therefore, is that we have to see dictatorship both as the intent of the party, but also the architecture that facilitates it. I've always argued, for example, that there is very little that is democratic in the American Constitution. About the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendment of the Constitution. If you take those 10 amendments away from the American Constitution, the American Constitution is very dictatorial. In that sense, that the Constitution by themselves are really not the Constitution was ratified, or before it was ratified. The argument was whether to leave it like that or not. And Jefferson and the others argued that you have to have a Bill of Rights. You have to have rights in those in that constitution that protect the individual. That's how they ended up with the 10 amendments. There were over 200 of them, but they eventually adopted them. So constitutions by themselves don't do don't create democracy. And so therefore, one has to, I think, ensure that our constitutions are as robust as possible. Constitutions don't have to be just documents that a document that is sitting there. Constitution has to be buttressed by statutes, that is, laws made by Congress. So, for example, you had the 15th Amendment of the American Constitution. It says that we have the right to vote in America. But the states were able to get around that 15th Amendment of the Constitution with Jim Crow laws. And so it took the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It did not only say that people have the right to vote, but it gave the federal government the right to enforce it. So the Voting Rights Act just law that was done recently in 2013. The Supreme Court knocked it down, right? But the point here, Lincoln, constitutions have to have teeth. Protest by itself is not going to develop, is not going to deliver the rule of law, all right? The rule of law itself has to be enshrined in the Constitution in direct ways. I mean, we have Article 13, talk about inclusive government. It doesn't have any teeth. Anybody can say what we're doing is inclusive government. But what we need, it's not that we don't need, I think, it is not that we don't need constitutional change. We need we call it constitutional reform. I say we need constitutional change. What we need in our constitution are clauses that are very, very clear. That doesn't leave room for interpretation. So I would throw out Article 13. Or I would make Article 13 very active. Right now, Article 13 is passive. It doesn't deliver inclusive governance. We are going to say that inclusive governance is what we need. We must say it in the Constitution expressly. It must be an express clause, not an inherent clause. An inherent clause is where you say, well, the thing is in there. It's inherent in there. An express clause is when you say, this is it. So I think the whole problem is that our Constitution is weak, that it does not have express clause that says, here is the power of this institution. Here is what this clause means. Here is what, when we talk about inclusive governance, we mean shared governance. The PPP saying what they do is inclusive governance. You see? So I think it's not one or the other. I think we need both. We need a robust constitution, but we also need the people to be the guardians of that robust constitution. I would argue that the present constitution allows little space for democratization. Very little space for democratization. The attractive clauses are not active. They're passive.
I want to tell you something, David. David here. Let me take Article 77 for instance.
Yes.
Which speaks about the regional system.
Yes.
It says that the region shall prepare its economic plan and it shall be funded by the central government.
Yes.
But you always carry one. Every time the region they go to the Minister of Finance, with the plan, he tell them where you going to fund.
Yeah.
But the Constitution says it shall be funded by central government. Okay? It's clear on that. But nobody over the years since 1980, this Constitution was put, seek to get the requisite legislation, carry them to the National Assembly, and have legislation put in place to make that, or to make it watertight, that it has to happen. How it will be happening, and it has to happen. Okay?
And that's what I'm talking about. That's
What
where
I'm
you and I
talking
agree.
about, that's why I'm saying it is not the Constitution, it's that we have not done put the concomitant laws in place to deal with the
Statutes,
issues.
yes. Yes,
Right?
you need
And then,
statutes.
this is what is happening in the United States. The Constitution don't have all these things, but people going with laws,
Yeah,
with bills to Parliament and make them into laws. Right?
yeah.
We have to start doing that. You're in opposition. Nobody will wait for the government to come and put. I will go with some questions. Write bills and carry them. That is what I'm saying. Write bills and carry them. Let us start the process.
Leno, come in here. Go ahead, Leno.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but Lincoln seems to love the Constitution the way it is. And I want to reiterate that the Constitution, the way it is an enabler. For example, when you could go into Parliament and you can, just by a simple majority, literally change the lives of people, and there's no recourse. For example, nobody brought a bill to, or to use the term Lincoln used, nobody brought concomitant laws to the National Assembly. And if somebody in the opposition wants to do that, they bring a law to the National Assembly, the government could simply just ignore it, and the Constitution allows them to ignore it.
Yeah.
So all I am saying, the foundation for any form of dictatorial state or elected dictatorship is the Constitution. And I would like to say, in my opinion, every government has now, the other thing we should look at, following up on a point that you made earlier, Dr. Hines, that the APNU AFC coalition is the most non-dictatorial government that you have ever seen. Now, I do not want to comment on that specifically, but what I want to say, that particular government campaigned on the fact that they want the Constitution to be changed. And when in office, nothing concrete or specific was done to change or amend, not even sustain discussion on whether the Constitution is serving us. So while Lincoln does not agree that the Constitution is a problem, it is clearly not serving us. It is clearly not serving us. And if it is not serving us, whether it is being enabled by concomitant laws or not, my point is, whoever holds the reins of power has unlimited power to be dominant in the country, unlimited power to shape our economy, unlimited power to shape our judiciary, unlimited power to literally do anything. And the Constitution could have been worded differently to even prevent that in the Constitution itself. But so simply just talking about not going to Parliament or protests or what the case might be, I agree that a multifaceted approach needs to be utilized, but we also need to have a formulated view and open national discussion. So since I'm a young child, I'm hearing this talk about constitutional reform. But yet, a majority of my countrymen do not understand the constitution we do have. And I don't hear any movement of people trying to educate people on the current constitution so that we have an understanding how we move from here to there. And so these things need to be formulated so that when we call people out on a protest or some other form of activism, people understand that, look, I am not merely protesting because, look, if we are to change the constitution, people who support whichever government is in power, we will need their support to change the constitution. In other words, if we argue that the current government is dictatorial, it's impossible to change the constitution without consent of either the government or their supporters. And so if we take a slam bam protest opposition view of the constitution, we may get no further than street protests. And that's all. The constitution allows the government to ignore everyone. All right?
Yeah.
It allows the government to ignore everyone.
But Leno, the constitutional reform of 1999 to 2001, we got that as a result of protest. It was in the wake of the 1997 election when the PNC took their supporters to the street that then forced the PPP to the table. We're getting some feedback. To force the PPP to the table, in which they signed the Herd-Munster Accord. And it was out of that accord that we got constitutional reform. So there is a relationship between protest and constitutional change. So one Mr. Etwaru is talking about asking me where I was when Burnham rewrote the Constitution of Guyana. Are you able to express your views on Burnham's Constitution? So shut up and take the back door. Mr. Etwaru, I was on the front lines. When that constitution was changed, I was in prison fighting Mr. Burnham. You all need to shut up when you all come on programs like this, because you all don't know what you're talking about. The next thing, Mr. Etwaru, is that the PPP's constitutional proposal to the Independence Commission, when they were trying to figure out what constitution to have at independence, the PPP's constitution was the replica of Burnham 1980 constitution. That's the second thing, Mr. Etwaru. The third thing, Mr. Etwaru, when Burnham outlined this constitution in 1980, the PPP had no objection to the constitution. They had an objection to Mr. Burnham being in charge. They had no objection to the constitution. That is why, Mr. Etwaru, the PPP has not made a single step to change the David Modest, I think you're right. No law can trump the Constitution. If you make a law, it's easy to get it annulled if the Constitution doesn't support it. And you're right. And what we have in Constitution practice, somebody's getting a bad feedback from somebody. Mr. Operator? Yeah. So, David Modest, you're right. You're right. The American Constitution, for example, says, the 10th Amendment says all powers not given to the federal government are reserved for the states, because the state rights part of the American Constitution. But there's another part of the Constitution called the Supremacy Clause that says whenever there is a difference between the federal government and the state government, the federal government shall be supreme, right? So Whether it is the Supremacy Clause or the States' Rights 10th Amendment, whether that get enacted, it depends on who sits on the court. So the court here is critical. Like I suspect when Lincoln Lewis talks about upholding the Constitution, that's what he's referring to. Courts are critical because under judicial review, it is the courts that have taken it onto themselves to determine what is constitutional and what is not constitutional. So as we have our discussion and discourse in Guyana about our laws and our constitution, the courts are critical. The courts are extremely critical. I think Nigel Hughes made a point here on this program last week when he said that at present, they're asking the courts in Guyana to settle a political problem that we have. And the courts are not set up to settle our political problems. However, the court cannot turn away cases, but the court also cannot settle a political problem. So we are at a crossroads in Guyana, not only in terms of our constitution, but in terms of the roles of the different branches of government. In my own humble opinion, I think there are instances in the recent past where the courts acted in ways that may have enabled the executive to become much to overreach. I think the case is still going on, but I think if we were to take the Chief Justice's ruling in the last petition case on the recount, if that ruling is allowed to stand, then it has given GCOM unlimited powers. Which branch of government does GCOM fall under? GCOM falls under the executive branch. So there is a way in which I think our courts are critical to happen. Let me come back to you, Lincoln Lewis. Lincoln, you there? I'm not getting Lincoln. I'm not. You all have to unmute your mic, Mr. Operator. Please unmute your mic, Lincoln Lewis. Leno, you're there?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, Leno, I'm not getting Lincoln. Leno, as we press forward, we're talking about constitutional reform as a way of somebody who's not on, please mute yourself. I think Lincoln have to mute yourself when you're not on. Yes, Leno. We're talking about constitutional reform. You've made the point that constitutional reform is a very tough process. I know of nowhere in the world in which it's easy to change the constitution, perhaps the French, because the French of the developed countries, France has been the place that has changed its constitution most frequently, the various French republics, as we call them. So you don't seem to think in the short term or the medium term, constitutional reform will emerge. How then could we stop a dictatorship?
Okay.
Go ahead, Leno.
I think constitutional. Continue, make a point. I'll come back. I'm having some difficulty. Give me a second.
Yeah, David.
Lincoln, are you on?
Can I come in?
Yes.
Yes, I'm here.
You can.
Let me just make a point to you.
Yes, come in.
Let me tell you what. You know, everybody, so many persons, just take United States as an example. And you see on the 6th of January what happened, what Donald Trump was able to do. We are seeing every day where you're talking about United States as bastion of democracy, where the Republicans are saying very openly that they
Lincoln, we seem to have lost you. We're really having some technical difficulties tonight. Lincoln Lewis and Leno Craig are my guests while they work to fix their technical problems. We have heard in the news overnight that the government has announced that it has set up what it calls a new security team in addition to the police force and the army. And they're not able to give much details on this new security apparatus because they're claiming that it's a security issue and they cannot give details. We heard when the PPP came to power that they were trying to get some kind of border patrol. The argument that was made at the time by those who smelled something was that it is the duty of the army. It is the duty of the army to patrol the border. Why are you setting up another entity? They did not go forward with that. Now they're talking about a new entity to fight crime. And this entity will have branches in the various regions of the country. Quite rightly, the opposition is asking for more details. For more details. Why do we want parallel institutions to fight crime? We already have the police force. We already have Suku. Why do we need this other institution to fight crime? So if you are asking for money for an institution to fight crime, then of course you can't give much details for security reasons. And so therefore, it appears as though the government is using the guise of security in order to create a parallel security element in our country. We go back to when the PPP was in office before. We know that they had no confidence in the police force and the army, and so they set up the Phantom Squad. And we know that government ministers were fingered in buying hardware, military hardware for the Phantom Squad. We know that. Now it seems as though, in my humble estimation, they may be moving the Phantom Squad off the streets and now putting them inside of the state apparatus. That is why I began tonight by talking about the state. I don't talk about the Constitution, but I talked about the state. Because it is the state. The Constitution is a piece of paper. It's the state that allows the government to do certain things. And governments usually hide under the power of the state. You see, the state has the power to declare a state of emergency. Very broad thing. And when you declare a state of emergency, the power is given to the Supreme. The state under state security. And using the cover of state security, the government is able to do certain things. Are we in the presence of that? What is this new institution all about? This new institution that they're putting in place. Louis, are you with me? Lincoln is not with me. Leno Craig, are you with me?
Yeah, I'm here. Lincoln is talking.
Leno, can you comment? Yes.
Lincoln is talking, but his mic seems to be muted. I see his mouth moving up. But
my mic is here. My mic is on.
All right, Lincoln, manipulate that mic properly. So who's going to go first? Lincoln, you go first.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, I'm hearing you now.
All right. Let me tell you this. When it comes to the question of law and order, there's a strange or this government is a stranger to this. These things are strangers to this government. This government is preparing again to start killing people who made dissent, who may have dissenting views with them. This parallel state apparatus that they're putting in place is to pay people a certain amount of money to do as they like. There can be no other reason. Why is it that they can't talk? Why do we not take that same money? We have 10 regions. And let me put together what we call regional police. Let each region establish what you call a regional police force for the region. And they do their thing just like the United States and other areas, other parts of the world. They don't want that. They want control from Freedom House to say who must die and who must live. That's the issue. And the more the more we run away from it, from calling a spade, we are emboldening these people. We are helping them to do the things that they are doing. People don't want to, you know what? We demonize. I listened to Leno a little while ago, and I tell you what, they demonize protests in this country. The people who said that's not where we must behave. A lot of people, the middle and upper class, the people who move from the middle class going to the upper, that's not where we ought to behave. We ought to do this and we ought to do that, and this is what we get.
That is an inaccuracy to say I've demonized.
I ain't say you say so, you know. I ain't say you say so, you know. I say demonize protests in this country. They demonize protests in this country. And
Lincoln, before I bring,
hold on. Let me just make this point, David. You know, in the 90s, you know how Desmond Hite was able to get the PVP to agree for the limited amount of electoral reform. It was protests. It was boycott. They know no other thing but that. These people know no other thing but this. These people, I'll tell you something. These men and women, they will stand up in front of you. You will have mangoes in your hand, and they will tell you it's apples. And they will argue that it's apples, fully well knowing that what they're saying is not the truth. These are the type of people that you're dealing. They are similar to some who behave a certain way in the country David resides. This is how these guys behave. And if you're going to be prepared to tell people that you are gentlemen and you are ladies and we must behave this way and we ought not to behave that way, when people start to tell you about how you must behave, you know what they want to do? Is to keep you in the same subjugating mode that they have put you in. And I see it as one way that we have to fight against those things.
Lincoln, there is something that you're missing in your call to protest and things like that. It's like the body. Not everyone could be a foot or a hand or an eye. And people have different roles to play in society. People have strengths and they have weaknesses. You did mention the 1991, not 91, that would have been around
99 to 2001.
Right, after 97, right, around 99, right. You didn't mention that the constitutional change and how it came about. But there is one fact that is escaping you, and that is when those who agitated for constitutional change at that time, Desmond Hoyt and his people, they had a raft of written work that they saw through Haslin Paris and several other persons. They had a raft of things that they had on the table And so the discussion, it was easy to start the discussion. It was easy um, to move on from there. But many times we go out in the street, we are agitating and advocating for just constitutional change, but what do we want to see our future constitution to be? What do we want these laws to say and reflect? And too often we do not have a formulation. And then people look at the protest movement and it is then easy to label them. Now, when these things are properly formulated, then they can go hand in glove either with protests or reaching out to international community and so many other things. But if we move forward on a one track or too strong in one area, our weaknesses in the other areas will show up. And simply all I'm saying is that if we do not, and that is why Guyanese constitution, even though since I am a child, I heard that we need constitution reform, and I'm still hearing it now. One of the reasons why we have not moved remarkably in that direction is because we have had malformed um, agitation for constitutional change. When it becomes a little more balanced, when the parts are together, I think we're going to make more progress.
Gentlemen, neither of you dealt with the issue. Let me just read. Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance Gail Teixeira on Monday evening sought to allay fears that the new security body being created by the administration will not usurp the functions of Lincoln. You have to take off your volume when you're off. We get that feedback from you. The function of the established forces, and there's nothing conspiratorial about it. Members of the parliamentary opposition were shocked Monday evening when it was revealed that the Irfan Ali government had made a lot of headway in establishing what is called this regional joint support team. And we're speaking of 249,967,523 to operationalize it. Initiating questions on the matter was leader of the opposition, Joe Armand, who pointed to the $245 million, which was listed as to cater for the provision of additional resources for this regional support team. Is there a regional joint support team in the GDF? I have never heard about it. I don't know whether the minister can give some clarity to that, because if we are provided additional resources, that suggests to me that there is already a team in existence. Lincoln Lewis, comment on that, and Leno Craig. We have gone past the constitutional reform thing. Can you all offer a comment on this new development?
Let me take part of that. Now, let me tie that back into our original discussion. Before I develop any other point, I am saying that the way the state is set up, the way the constitution is set up, it allows the government to do that. Many people across the world during the Donald Trump administration argued that Donald Trump had dictatorial ways about him, and he is one shade below dictator. And if the American legal system, the federal system, the Constitution of America and the concomitant laws had allowed Donald Trump to be a dictator all the signs are that he would have, but the structure, the architecture of the state limited him. Our architecture does not limit any government. The current PPP government has the power to do that. Um, as to whether they should, and as to whether they should be more open, that's a matter for their own. They have to volunteer that information, so to speak. If they do not, there's nothing stopping them from doing it. And
Leno,
it
what
comes
are they
back
up
to our
to?
point.
Leno, yeah, I take your point that the system allows them to be a majoritarian system. But I'm asking, what do you think, as a political activist and analyst, is behind what the PPP is proposing? Is there a need, and is a need for it? If there is not a need for it, why are they doing it? Hello?
Look, let me put it this way. I have not gotten enough information on it. I just read a snippet in passing today. I did not stay up to listen to Parliament the entire night last night. So I don't want to make an uninformed comment. However, setting up an entirely new security apparatus without being forthcoming with all the parameters certainly is not where a country would want to be, certainly doesn't give comfort to um, to citizens, judging, knowing the history we had with failure of security apparatus. And I think one thing that the current government could do, if they indeed is moving ahead with setting up an entirely new security apparatus, the lessons of life should tell us that they should be as open as possible with this, and they should be straightforward with the citizens. Otherwise, they will fuel suspicion, and suspicion will lead to all kinds of theories, and we can then end up back where we were in 2002, 2004, was it? Or thereabout. The jailbreak time. I think it's 2002, right?
Leno,
So we have to be very careful, and the opposition needs to scrutinize that. But don't let me comment specifically
Leno,
because I
Leno,
don't have
Leno,
the.
Leno, one last chance. Most of my audience is asking, Alison is asking, Leno, Craig, have they triggered your suspicion? That's what I want to hear from you, your view. Have they triggered your suspicion? One is asking, do you have to stay up all night to listen to the parliamentary debate to say whether you're suspicious of this move or not? Leno?
Yes, yes.
Your suspicion. That's what my audience want to know.
Like I'm saying, that I have not created a specific, but the signs to me are a little off, and it harks back. It takes one mind back to the 2002 scenario. And you can't help, anybody who lived in Guyana can't help but hark back to that period. When you
Okay.
hear comments of a private security apparatus. But don't let me be specific because I might be speaking ill-advisedly.
Lincoln Lewis is there? Is Lincoln there? Well, Lincoln, we seem to have lost Lincoln Lewis, Mr. Moderator, Mr. Operator. Um, is Lincoln Lewis there?
He's right there, but maybe he has stepped away from from the camera.
Oh well. All right. As we wind down on on this discussion, we're past program time. I will give the audience, give the panelists a chance to comment on this next issue in the news. The full House has voted to suspend David Patterson from the position of chair of the committee, Leno Craig. What's happening there?
Um, I think, as far as I know and I understand how these committees work, especially that specific committee, when those rules were set up, I think the idea was that government of the day should have as limited as possible hand in determining um, who chairs and who are the members that the opposition selects. It is really should be the domain of the main opposition. And I think that was the thinking behind it. That was the understanding. It is rather unfortunate that we are at a place where the government will take a specific role in creating a motion, debating the motion, and specifically, it is not like an opposition. I think that motion would have been better brought by the opposition person, the minor opposition person, the one minor opposition person. But for the government itself to dig so deeply into that realm, in my opinion, it's undesirable. And I think, good sense should prevail. Somebody, I don't know if it calls for court matter. I can't comment too much on legal aspects
Leno,
of
do
this.
you think that the full House of the Parliament has the power under the rules to remove the chairperson of the Public Accounts Committee? That is the question here.
No,
The
I did not
argument is
think
that the
so.
Public Accounts Committee. Go ahead.
Yeah, I never thought so. But what
Do they
I have
have the
learned
power? Does the full
from my understanding all the time, I would have thought that they did not. And even if there
they
was a
did not?
loophole,
Are you
and,
with us?
and even if there was a
Well,
loophole
uh-huh.
that allowed them, I think they should not have exercised that power. So I'm saying two things here. I'm saying one, that my understanding is that they did not have the power. And two, if a loophole was found that gave them that power, they should not have used it. Now, these questions would have to be answered in the court system. I heard commentary earlier on this same program that the court system sometimes enable this, the what you refer to as the dictatorial state. But for whatever it's worth, we should have it finally settled by the judiciary, and then other measures could be contemplated. But in my opinion, it's a little dangerous for the government to have done so, and I really think they should not have. And perhaps Lincoln might have a suggestion for a solution. I do not know where we go from here other than
Yeah.
saying
The question before us is the question before us, Leno, is that the Public Accounts Committee is what you call a standing committee in the legislature. All right? Does the full House have the right to determine who the chair of the standing committee should be? Any standing committee in any parliament, in any part of the world, the personnel to those committees are determined by their parties. Now, if a member of the House of Assembly who happens to be the chair, the full House, or by its rules committee, then that person will be removed or can be censured and removed from the House of Assembly, which means that he or she removed from the chair. This is from the chairmanship of a standing committee. It is not what is happening here. They're not censuring Patterson as a member of the National Assembly. And the Rules Committee, as part of that, where we don't have a Rules Committee, is a speaker who decides, which is part of our problem, right? If a member is censured and part of that disciplining says that he or she should be removed from the chairmanship of all committees, then yes, nothing like that happened. So it means only Patterson's party can censure him and remove him. That is my reading of the situation. He has to be censured by the full House for something that he did and be removed from the chairmanship based on the recommendation of the Rules Committee if there is one. Anyway, Lincoln, please come in. Lincoln, you have to unmute.
Yeah. I am not. You get him here? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah. The point I want to make.
You, Lincoln.
Yes, I'm saying that I can't agree with you more. You are right. The chairmanship of the committee is being determined by the opposition, and the majority opposition, the majority, which is the coalition, the minority, which is human, can determine that. They have to do this. Their appointment, they call. You know, we can talk from now till the cows come home about the Constitution and all the things. The rule said that is not what happened. And here again is where it comes. I'm making the point. It's not the Constitution, it's that we have not put laws in place on many occasions. On this occasion, you have law. You have the rules, and they are prepared to flout the rules. If I was the opposition, if I was leader of the opposition, and I would have reappointed thing. Let us have a showdown on that. This is where we lack the will to fight. I would have reappointed him. So resubmit his name. He's the chairman. You have to play. In this game here, it's not about tongue in cheek. This is not about playing a nice boy. When the people who elect you are being discriminated and beaten outside there, our people don't like to see cowards. We want to see fighters. We want our leaders to be fighting, and they are not fighting, and that's the point I'm making. Don't tell me about Constitution and all these type of nice things. That's copying out.
Yes,
I'm making the point. The article that I'm talking about is Article 27 of the Constitution. We talk about free education, and they're telling me the next 4 years we're gonna get it. You are telling me I must sit down now, and I must wait when you want to give me my constitutional right. When you swear to uphold the Constitution, When you get swear into office, I am swearing to uphold this constitution, and the constitution is free education. Tell me I can't get it the next 4 years? These are the type of things. These are issues. Let me tell you about it. I ain't walking on one foot. I'm telling you that whatever program you have enough there. You understand me? You have to walk. You have to put boots on the foot, boots on the ground. That's the only way this government will understand. That's all I get to tell you.
Right. And on that note, I think we are over our time. I want to thank you, Craig. I want to thank you, Lincoln Lewis, for coming on. Quite a spirited program tonight. These questions are left there, and perhaps on a follow-up panel, we would tease them out from another direction. Thank you all very much, and thanks to the audience for staying with us on this evening. The question of the law, the question of the Constitution, the question of the nature of the state, these are all questions that are interlinked. There's always a danger by looking at these questions from one angle. We have to look at them in their totality. Lincoln Lewis has always stressed that whatever redeeming clauses that there are in the Constitution, we must fight hard to ensure that the leaders are held accountable to maintaining and implementing these laws. Others have argued we need our watertight laws and watertight rules to hold our leaders accountable. Others, like Lewis, have argued that protest becomes the means by which we ensure that the rule of law is respected. Here in Guyana, we have always given the power to make these determinations to our political leaders. It is understandable. We've come out of a process of dehumanization. And so we have come to trust our leaders, who are the ones who led the children out of bondage. And so we accord unto them godlike status. And these leaders are humans, and they've personalized political power. I think in the final analysis, that is one of our biggest problems. That people are not dispassionate about power. That when we give them power, they personalize it as their power and exercise it as their power. Constitutions are general documents. Constitutions are often contradictory, one clause contradicting another clause. And often it is left to the courts to decide what is constitutional and what is not constitutional. And those who sit on the courts have different views of the law. Some of them read the law literally. Some of them read the law less literal than others. Some of them read the law as what Thurgood Marshall would say, a living document. Constitution is there as a living document. Others read it as a static document. And so therefore, we have these problems. Guyana is a new state, a post-colonial state. As I pointed out in the beginning, it is a state that has grappled, it is a country that has grappled with what to do about the state that we inherited at independence. We have modified that state in some instances, but in the final analysis, the colonial state is what sits there 60 years after independence. And that colonial state facilitated a colonial type of dictatorship. And in the post-independence era, that state has facilitated and continued to facilitate a post-colonial dictatorship. We have had change of governments, but we have not had change of regimes. Sometimes teams. They're not the same thing. Governments come and governments go, but the regime, that is the operating norm, the operating rules, they're there. That's what we call the regime. So we have a change of governments, but not change of regimes. Those who talk about the PNC regime talk about it as though when the PNC left power in 92, a new regime came into place. No, it is the same old regime. What got rid of was the PNC government. And the PPP government that comes in maintains the same regime. The Granger government did not take advantage of that regime in the same way as others. And so as a government, it presided over a state that did not act as aggressively authoritarian as the other parties have. The PPP has come back to power, and the same regime is there. That if you can fault the Granger government for anything, was that it did not move aggressively to break down the regime, to make it difficult. If you listen to the United States, what they're talking about post-Trump, how to prevent another Trump from emerging. But to do that, you have to break down the regime. America has been reluctant to do that. And that is why a Trump could appear. Guyana has been reluctant to do that. That is why Orphan Ali and Jack Yo could emerge. We've got to change the regime. We've got to break down that state apparatus. If we don't do that, we're going to find ourselves in eternal trouble. The struggle should not be for a single law or a single rule. The struggle must be to break down the state apparatus that presided over slavery, that presided over colonialism, because that is the apparatus we have been using to preside over independence. The colonial state was meant to beat back our freedom. The post-colonial state is the same state, cannot be used to free us. And that was what we were arguing about in the 1970s and the 1980s and the 1960s. That is what the WP and the PNC were arguing over. What do we do with that state? We fought that battle, and now, 60 years later, we should not be fighting that battle over what state. We know what we ought to do. This state that permits the PPP to do what it is doing has to be broken down. We have seen the PNC with that state. We've seen the PPP 2 times now. That state. We cannot allow that state apparatus to continue. We have got to break it down, because that's where our problem is. The PPP will always be what it is until there are rules that stand in its way. If you want to create a new state, a new security apparatus, then talk to people, talk to the opposition before. You don't create it and come to the people's house and tell the opposition, we already created this. There got to be rules to stop that. Hear my brother Lincoln about protests. And those protests are important, but as Leno Craig is saying, at the end of the protest, we have to ensure that there is change. You can't operationalize a bad constitution to make it good. Constitution has to go. The Constitution, enshrined in the Constitution, are the rules. And those rules can be taken advantage of. The advantage may vary depending on who is in office, but advantage would be there. Orphan Ali calls the head of the police commission allegedly to tell him who to promote. And then we start to protest that, only to find out that the grand government had called the commission. They're not called, they wrote the commission. The point I'm making is that they assume that that's their presidential right. But we have to have rules to say the presidents cannot call the police service commission. In countries like ours, we have to have what is called express laws, not implied laws. I imply that I shouldn't call based on this rule. We don't need implied laws. They're not working. We need express laws, laws that are expressly stated in the Constitution. And where the laws cannot be expressed, we need statutes that can express. Statutes can be struck down by the court. We understand that. But we cannot continue this way, because we will cry, look what the PPP doing today. And then our people go in, and then the people will cry and say, look what you all doing. The PPP made a big noise about the sugar workers who were knocked off in the right sizing of Gaisuku. And they come into power and they say, we are right sizing Guyana. And they knock off people too. When is this nonsense going to stop? When is it going to stop? Somebody has to stop it at some point, or else we will continue to slip down the slippery slope of nowhere. At some point, you have to say, party stops here and Guyana matters. So here we are, sisters and brothers. Ponder, think, reflect on where we are going, because our leaders have the power to do it. Protests are necessary, and we must have those to stop the clear and present danger. But when we are protesting, we have to ensure that we are protesting not just to stop the clear and present danger, but to stop danger for all time. So we need a new kind of protest. Protest is not short-sighted and short-term. A protest that thinks far. For too long, we've been having this kind of conversation, this kind of argument. For the sake of our children and our grandchildren who are on the cusp of what could possibly be a new day for us, where we can wipe out poverty, we can wipe out want. And if we wipe out poverty and want, we can wipe out a lot of things. When our children see this horizon in front of them, at this point, the PPP is trying to turn all of that back. They're trying to muddy the waters of our children. We've got to protest and get them to stop that, because we've got to do more. We've got to change the rules that govern how we live in Guyana. Until the next time, David Hines thanking you for tuning in to another edition of Politics 101. And to say to you, keep the faith, keep the faith, keep the faith. Because if you don't keep the faith, you're doing nothing. See you all on Thursday.